Welcome to the Dr. Jimbo Love Show featuring Seth Matthew. I am Sethless once again. Unfortunately, Seth is not able to be on the broadcast today. He is tied up below me right now doing his general manager and bartending duties. So anyways, want to welcome you back, folks. Good to have you here. Last Thursday, a week ago Thursday, we did a show, Cornell Hockey and NCHC Hockey, which is the hockey league that DU is part of. And we compared it with the ECAC league, which is basically the Ivy League schools and some schools back east. And we had a guest, the general manager for Cornell Hockey, Scott Howard, my friend, and he was on the show, and it was pretty interesting. We had one correction that we wanted to take care of, and Scott had said that he thought that Harvard and some of these schools had, 10 to 13 or 10 to 12 first-round draft picks. What he meant was overall draft picks. So we wanted to correct that for Scotty, and also, too, give him a quick little plug for his company, Forever Green Farms. If you have any kind of need for an evergreen tree, Scott can get you the tree anywhere from 12 footers up to 35 footers. I mean, he's got the big ones. He'll dig them for you, and he'll put them on a truck and send them out to you. So feel free to give him a call at 607-227-3500. Again, that's Forever Green Farms. Ask for Scott Howard, the GM for Cornell Hockey. All right, so let's talk about what we're going to do today. We're going to talk a little bit about college football. College football was in their first week, and if you looked at ESPN, you can see that basically they said this is week 1 of 13 weeks. So interesting, the first week is, there's a lot of schools that you don't get a chance to see very often playing, with the exception of the game that happened over in Ireland, which was Nebraska versus Northwestern. Now, that was an interesting game, and we're going to talk a lot about Scott Frost, the Nebraska head coach, in his 5th season, and just talk a little bit about the hot seat that he is under. For those of you out there that watched some college football yesterday, you know that Nebraska lost, 31-28. We will go into that a little bit today as well. And we're also going to talk about some other coaches that are on the hot seat. And remember, folks, last year, Florida got rid of Dan Mullins at Thanksgiving. It was actually before Thanksgiving. He had won the SEC East the year before. He had beaten Georgia. He was in the SEC championship game against, of course, Alabama, which they lost. But still, within a year, before the season even ended, Dan Mullins was no longer the University of Florida coach. So we'll talk about some of the other people that may be in the hot seat as well. We'll talk a little bit about the last weekend in NFL preseason. The reason we are here right now is it is halftime of the Pittsburgh Steelers versus Detroit Lions, 3rd preseason game. The reason we were here watching is basically because Pittsburgh is having a quarterback competition between Mitch Trubisky and Kenny Pickett. So the second half will all be Kenny Pickett. I just got a chance to watch the first half. It ended, I believe, 9-0 Pittsburgh. Second half will be interesting. I want to see Pickett. I want to see if he can continue with his overall passing percentage. And it'll be interesting to see who Mike Tomlin picks as quarterback. We'll talk a little bit about WNBA. Now, we did a show back in March, I think it was, maybe late February, where we featured Becky Hammond. Now, Becky Hammond is a Colorado State University graduate. She also played in the WNBA for a number of years, held the number of 3 points made in a season record of 80 until one of her teammates, actually, one of her players, actually just beat the record, has 113 three-point field goals. And we'll talk a little bit about her. WNBA, as we were saying, Becky Hammond got paid a lot of money in comparison to the other coaches, also in comparison to some of her players. And in our show, we highlighted the fact that Becky Hammond, some of her players were criticizing the amount of money she's being paid. Well, guess what? They were number one, and they are the number one seed in the WNBA in the playoffs, which did get started today. They're playing against the Seattle Storm right now as we speak. We'll cover a little bit of what the other two teams are and, what they're going on. Now, it's a 1 versus 4 and a 2 versus 3, 5-game series. So that's it for WNBA after that. So we'll have to see what happens. But wouldn't it be ironic if old Las Vegas Aces and Becky Hammond are able to pull it off and win a WNBA championship after some of her own team criticized her for the money they're being paid? I think it was money well spent. And congratulations to Becky Hammond. Now remember, she came over, she was a coach under Greg Popovich for the San Antonio Spurs for a number of years. So she's been in the NBA locker room, she's proven herself, and she is continuing to impress people in the WNBA because, finishing number one seed in your first year as a rookie coach speaks volumes. All right, so let's go in and talk a little bit about week 1 of college football. And, the first game I want to highlight, of course, is Nebraska versus Northwestern. Now, Scott Frost was a star quarterback for Nebraska, and from what I understand, he grew up very close, if not in the same hometown that Nebraska's there, so it would have been in Lincoln. He's a Lincoln kid. Remember, Scotty Frost was with University of Central Florida 5 years ago, and he took them to an undefeated season. Now, the undefeated team did not qualify for the college football playoff, unlike what happened with Cincinnati last year where they were undefeated and they did qualify. But anyways, so he comes back to Nebraska and he has really struggled. I mean, he hasn't had a winning season yet. Last year they were 3 for 9, okay, 3-9. And they had 9 losses last year, all by less than, ironically speaking, 9 points. So they were losing all these close games. Now they go out and in the third quarter yesterday, Nebraska was up 28-17 versus Northwestern. This is a game that they played in Ireland, so it was a night game over there. And what happened? Northwestern came back and ended up winning 31-28. I was able to catch the last 10 minutes of that game at Blake Street Tavern downtown. Unfortunately, Nebraska just did not. And they didn't convert on some third downs. They also had 3 turnovers and a botched onside kick that really turned the game around for them. And Northwestern ended up winning. So, Scotty Frost, are you on the hot seat? I think so. And he has a buyout, which we're going to talk about in just a second, that doesn't kick in, but his buyout goes way down compared to what it is now as of October 1st. Will Scott Frost make it through this season? Especially the way he started out. Not good. I hope so. I've been a fan of his. I like him. But something obviously is wrong. He's in his 5th season, and they're losing their opener to a not-so-good Northwestern team. Second game that we are going to feature today is Florida State. They played Duquesne, Now, Duquesne is a small school out of Pittsburgh. Good pharmacy program. My cousin graduated from there, and she's been a pharmacist for probably almost 25, 30 years now. But Duquesne is a good little school. They played Florida State. Unfortunately, they got blown out. Florida State won 47-7. End of the first half, it was 20-0. By the halftime, it was, I should say, at the end of the first quarter, it was 20-0. Halftime, 26-0, and it didn't get any better for Duquesne in the second half. Quarterback Jordan Travis of Florida State was 11 for 15, 207 yards passing. They had 3 running backs for Florida State that were over 100 yards rushing. They had Ward Benson and Tolaphili. Crazy. That's one heck of a running game when you get 3 guys in college football, especially in the climate that we're in now where everybody wants to pass the ball so much. 3 running backs over 100 yards. Next I've got UNC, University of North Carolina, 56 versus Florida A&M, 24. So 56-24, UNC beats Florida A&M. It was 28-14 a half, not too bad, you know. A&M held in there, but a fourth quarter where UNC scored 21 points was way too much for Florida A&M to handle. The quarterback for UNC, his name is May, was 29 for 37, 294 yards. For Florida A&M, Musa was the quarterback, 28 for 38, 279 yards. So UNC had a receiver catch 9 passes. His name was Josh Downs, 9 receptions, 78 yards. Not too bad. Not too bad for an opening first game for North Carolina. So we'll have to watch them this year. Remember, they're playing in the ACC, which is usually considered kind of the down team of the Power 5, although every year's different, so let's wait and see what happens. Other games that happened, we had Austin Peay loses to Western Kentucky, 38-27, 52 UNLV, 21 Idaho State. Jacksonville State, Deion Sanders teams, the Gamecocks down there, 42 versus Stephen F. Austin, 17 points. Good job for Deion, and good opening for them. Again, these are a lot of the HBC teams that played each other and got a chance to get highlighted in prime time yesterday. Mercer versus Morehead State. Mercer wins 63-13. Rough day for Morehead State. And then lastly, well, of these games, and we're going to talk a little bit about Wyoming's game versus Illinois in just a second. But Alabama State 23, Howard 13. So that brings us to the Wyoming-Illinois game. Okay. Wyoming really took a beating last year. They had a pretty good squad up there. They gave Florida State a run for their money. Not Florida State, I mean Colorado State a run for their money. Had a really good season. And all of a sudden, they lose all these people through the portal, the transfer portal, okay? And it had to have hurt them, but again, they were playing against an Illinois team. They lost 38-6. Chase Brown for Illinois had 3 touchdowns and 115 yards rushing. DeVito, the quarterback for Illinois, the Illini, 27 for 37, 92 yards passing. You know, that's a little mundane, but when your running back's scoring 3 touchdowns for you, one being a pass reception, you know, you don't have to do a whole heck of a lot. Wyoming's quarterback, Drew Peasley, was 6 for 20 for 40 passing yards. Okay? Not good. Now, either Illinois has a great secondary or Drew Peasley just did not have a very good game. 6 for 20 does not cut it. Titus Swen had 98 yards rushing, and Wyoming just struggled. They were 1 for 12 on third down conversions. 1 for 12, folks, that's terrible. If you can't get a first down, then you're in some big trouble, especially when you're playing against a Big Ten team like Illinois. Even though they're not always, they're not a top Big Ten team, but here you are having a chance to, as a Mountain West program, to strut your stuff against a Power 5 program, and you're 1 for 12 in third down conversions. Just, you're not going to win any ball games that way. The no-huddle offense that Illinois employed on offense really hurt Wyoming's defense. They were not ready in many plays, and as the score reflects, 38-6, they got blown out. So, all right. Well, let's transition here, and let's talk a little bit about some hot seat coaches. Now remember, next week we are going to, actually let's go over that real quick here. Next week we've got some extremely good games. Of course, we've got the Notre Dame-Ohio State game. Okay, Ohio State's preseason number 2, and Notre Dame is number 5. So it should be a great game, and we'll be talking about that. Oregon is also playing a big game as well. We'll talk a little bit about that next week. And there'll be some other games that we'll highlight as well. I'm looking at my notes here, and I can't see exactly where it is. So anyways, next week is going to be really the official start where you're going to start seeing a lot of schools playing. The other game that we want to talk about is going to be Michigan versus Colorado State University. That is going to be played in Ann Arbor next week. We will be watching Coach Norvell from CSU right up the street here in Fort Collins, and they will have a national spotlight to play, and we'll see if his air attack, okay, he calls it an air raid offense, we'll see how it does against a team that's ranked 7th in the nation preseason, Michigan. We'll see how it does against their secondary. So, all right. Let's talk a little bit about some coaches that are on the hot seat. And there's nobody that's more on the hot seat right now than Scott Frost. Now, last season, 30 major college football teams changed their head coach. 30. Okay? There's approximately 106 teams that are Division 1A college football. So almost a third changed their coach. And that says a lot. That just shows you the win-first mentality that college football has, especially these programs. So some of the notable programs that changed coach: USC, OU, Notre Dame, and LSU. Okay, those are teams that are perennially in the top 25. They changed their coaches. And of course, Notre Dame and LSU swapped coaches, so there's two major college programs that you can mention, and it really involves the same guy. So last year we talked a little bit about what happened with Dan Mullins winning the SEC East and then being canned before Thanksgiving because Florida struggled. Will that happen to Scott Frost? His buyout is $8 million as of October 1st. Meaning that if he gets through the month of September and then, they decide to fire him, they only have to pay him $8 million, which in the scheme of things isn't huge. Will they do that to their hometown and Heisman candidate, Scott Frost, who was a quarterback there? A lot of you guys remember him, and just an overall good guy. I hope not. I really do. But they've been 3-9 the last year. So, it's winter. Move on. And Nebraska people, as much as they love Scotty Frost, they want to win more. So I would say that let's watch Nebraska, especially the first 4 or 5 games that they play, and hope and pray that Scott Frost can turn things around a little bit. Auburn, already, they just get this coach. His name is Brian Harsin. He's from Boise State. Boise State has had a great success over the years. Every year, they're the team that can upset anybody. And so they bring down Brian Harsin one season in, and they already talked about firing him. Now, in the SEC, it's all about recruiting, okay? And unfortunately, his class that's coming in 2023, not this year's class, but next year's class, ranks 63rd out of all college football. Now, he's competing against Alabama, okay, which always has a top 5, and against Texas A&M, who was the #1 recruiting class of this season, okay? Nick Saban and Jimbo Fisher go back and forth. I think it's because they're competing for the same players in so many instances. And when Jimbo Fisher ends up having a better recruiting class, Nick Saban will hear him, making excuses about why his recruiting class wasn't so good. And this last season, it's talking about the name, image, likeness money, the nil money, and oh my goodness, Texas A&M must be paying nil money to all these guys because they have the #1 recruiting class. Well, back to Brian Harsin. 63 does not cut it, and will not cut it in the SEC. In order to compete in the top conference in college football, you're going to have somewhere in the top 10, at least top 15 recruiting classes, or you're never going to be able to compete. I mean, you're going to be having apples versus oranges, where the apples are your 5-star recruits and your oranges are your 3- and 4-star recruits. So, the other person is Georgia Tech. We have Jeff Collins there. He took over for this guru coach that was a triple threat coach, Paul Johnson. He's only won 9 games in 3 seasons, okay? And that's in a weaker, Power 5, mind you, but weaker ACC conference. So they say that they'll be patient with this guy as long as he can win 6 games this year and become bowl eligible. The people at Georgia Tech will probably keep this gentleman on and give him the full time to try to develop his team. But we'll wait and see. You never know how it goes. I mean, this guy could really lay an egg this year and be out of a job. All right. Good old Herm Edwards. You guys remember him? He was doing some broadcasting for quite a while. Herm Edwards then went back to college coaching. He's been at Arizona State. Recruiting violations abound with his staff, and unfortunately he lost a major portion of his staff, and he lost a lot of these talented players through the college transfer portal. Okay, now a lot of people in college football, you get attached to your position coach. You lose your position coach, he goes to another school. Of course he's going to ask you or somebody that he likes and recruited to maybe transfer with him, go to wherever school he is. Unfortunately, that happened to Arizona State. Excuse me. All right. We've got Mike Norvell at Florida State. Now, Florida State traditionally, with Bobby Bowden and Jimbo Fisher being there, have been a top team. 2-year record, 8-13. Not very good. It's a $20 million buyout, but the word is that they're going to give Mike Norvell at least another year, maybe 2 years. The patience, patience is the theme at Florida State. So we'll wait and see if their patience is rewarded, or if Norvell ends up, not making the cut and moving on down the road. And then lastly, we've got Dino Babers out of Syracuse. Syracuse is a team that I watched, quite a bit. I mean, of course, I'm a South Carolina Gamecock fan, but I also watched Syracuse Orange. And he's only had 1 winning season in the last 6 years. Syracuse has a proud tradition of great college football. Now, it hasn't been great in the last 20 years, but even in the 90s with Donovan McNabb, they were relevant. So one winning season in the last 6 years is not going to really cut it for this gentleman. The buyout is $10 million after this season. Will Syracuse, will they, jump on that and move him down the road? I don't know. The Dome, the Syracuse Dome used to do so much recruiting for both programs. Everybody wanted to play in that Dome. It is so loud, and it is such a great venue for football and basketball. You would see that a lot of the time that Syracuse, the Dome would do the recruiting for them, especially on the basketball floor, because of Big Monday and all the stuff in the Big East back then. Everybody wanted to go to Syracuse. Well, that's not the case anymore. So Dino Babers needs to do a better job of attracting some better recruits and win some ball games, or else he'll be no longer at the Dome to play, to coach Syracuse. All right, let's see what else we got going here. One of the things we're going to talk about, and I may push this into next week, but I think I'm going to, is the numbers and the brand by numbers. So there's an article in the Denver Post this weekend, and I was reading it before I came on the air today. And basically it talks about Oklahoma, Texas, USC, UCLA, Cincinnati, BYU, Central Florida. Anyways, the teams that have all been in the mix and have either transferred conferences or are in the mix of transferring. And then they also compare it to CU and CSU. And basically this is average viewership, games on network TV, and then of course bowl games. And we'll get into some of the numbers next week. I want to save this for Seth because I want to get his impression. Now, his Oklahoma Sooners are number one right now out of all these teams as far as these categories go. But it's kind of interesting, and it kind of gives you a gauge of how some of these conferences are going out and recruiting top-notch talent and what it brings to the conference. And then on the other end, what a team like CSU or CU compared to these other teams brings to the table. And you're going to see the haves and the have-nots. And it's very much reflected in how much people watch, okay, and also how many games they end up getting on major primetime networks. Now that affects recruiting, so it's a trickle-down effect all the way down to the point where this is why some of the have-not programs have been stuck in mediocrity for so long. Or in our case, with CU and CSU, they have both just been terrible in the last 10 seasons. Is it, what is it? What is the symptom? Can they break out of it? Do they need to bring in a coach that's an up-and-comer and keep them? Because remember, CSU had McElwain, and he got the job in Florida. Now, it didn't work out really well for him down in Florida, but he was one of the buzz candidates for all the big college football jobs, and we couldn't keep him here. So, anyways, we'll talk a little bit more about that next week. All right. So, next week, again, we're going to talk about Michigan CSU, okay? Folks, tune in if you are here in the Rocky Mountain region. You're going to be able to watch the CSU Rams go to the Big House in Ann Arbor. It's going to be interesting to see how they and their passing offense holds up against a top 10 secondary, okay? Notre Dame versus Ohio State. We'll be all over that game next week. We are going to break it down in depth on both sides of the ball. Remember, Notre Dame had a quarterback competition. We'll let you know exactly how that worked out and whether or not the other quarterback, we may see, if something goes horribly wrong in the first half, will we see that other quarterback for Notre Dame? I don't know, but we'll find out and we'll talk about it next week. Air Force versus Northern Iowa. Air Force has got a good team, okay? They're just down in Colorado Springs, about 60 miles south of us. We're going to be watching them this year because remember, they have had, some votes for the top 25. So, they get some national attention, and we'll see if they can put together a heck of a season. And it's going to start with Northern Iowa, and then, of course, remember, Air Force has CU, University of Colorado, coming up in the third week. So we'll be covering that, and that's another little tease for the middle of September. Two local teams. It's going to be really interesting to see what happens. My money's on Air Force. All right, now we have what I was talking about before, the WNBA going on right now, as well as we have two NFL preseason games. And it looks like the Giants beat the Jets, I believe, 24-21. And the Steelers are now at halftime against the Lions. Again, this comes down to who's going to start for the Steelers. Is it going to be Mitch Trubisky or is it going to be Kenny Pickett? Well, we'll find out here because Kenny Pickett is going to have the entire second half. Now, Trubisky didn't score any touchdowns in the first half, and he looked okay. He threw some good balls, but I'm telling you, man, he throws a lot of balls off of his back foot. Doesn't set his feet, and he doesn't throw down the field, and that is a concern for me. We'll wait and see what happens. Like I said, I trust Tomlin, and we'll have more to talk about next week once this game completes. There was no Jared Goff today for the Detroit Lions, and I saw Aiden Hutchinson played the first half for the Lions. Remember, he's the number 2 overall pick, and he's out of Michigan. Very good ball player, excellent edge rusher. We'll be watching him all season. Didn't have any sacks in the first half, thank God. Trubisky was able to avoid them. Steelers, we'll see. We'll see what happens. Remember, the Rossiters get cut Tuesday by 4 o'clock. That means we have tomorrow yet. They go from 80 to 53, and they call it the initial 53. Initial because, of course, there's always going to be the practice squad. Most practice squad players are about 8 to 16 players. And remember, practice squad players, can be picked up by other teams if they want to call them, so they're not protected. The only people that are really protected are the 53 that are on the initial roster. So, a lot of guys, their dreams are going to be dashed. And, it's got to be tough going in as a coach and, telling somebody that they didn't make the team. Although you hope that most of them after the last preseason game kind of know. They know whether or not they're going or staying. All right, let's talk real quick about the WNBA. They're down to 4 teams. We've got Las Vegas Aces, coached by Becky Hammond, CSU graduate and member of the various Olympic teams, former coach of the San Antonio Spurs under Greg Popovich. So she has taken her squad, and they have the number 1 seed, and they are playing against the Seattle Storm. That game just completed. I'm not sure. They were down. Las Vegas was down in the third quarter by about 4 points. But check your Google listings, and you'll see who won that game. We also have Chicago Sky versus the Connecticut Sun. That's 2 versus 3. So both those teams will play each other in a 5-game series. The winners will go to the championship game. And as I was saying earlier, my money and my hopes are with Becky Hammond and the Aces out of Las Vegas. Love to see them win a WNBA championship. Now, one person that I did want to point out was Kelsey Plum, and she is a player for the Las Vegas Aces. In 2017, she was the number 1 overall draft out of college. She averaged 20.2 points per game, second in the WNBA this season. Okay, she's got a 42% 3-point percentage, and she just broke Becky Hammond's single season 3-point field goal record. She crushed it. Becky Hammond was an 80. Okay, that was the best that there ever was. And we've got Kelsey Plum coming in at 113 made. Okay? That's beating it big time by 33 three-pointers. And she was doing it at a 42% pace. That's very good. She was the MVP of the All-Star game. Her nickname is Plum Dog. All right, Plum Dog. Let's see how you can do in the playoffs, because this is when it really counts. And we'll be looking at her stat line here momentarily to see how she ended up doing with the first game of the playoffs today. She is an all-time leading NCAA collegiate women's scorer. She's out of the University of Washington. So we're going to put that name, mark it down, maybe pull her up on Google and check her out a little bit. It's Kelsey Plum, Las Vegas Aces. All right. Well, we want to invite you to come down to Brothers Bar and Grill. This is where we're broadcasting today. You can see it behind me in the background. Seth is down there busily pouring drinks and taking care of all of his general manager stuff, but he will be back next week. We will be here at 11 o'clock on Saturday. Okay, we're going to break down college football the way that Seth is able. I can't wait to pick his brain. I miss him. And we'll be talking a little bit of NFL. We'll also give you an update on this WNBA playoff situation, give you some stat lines, maybe pick out a couple other people to feature. This week, again, like we said, Kelsey Plum and Becky Hammond. We're very proud of those ladies and the way that their teams are performing this season. Come on down to Brothers. We're located at the Shops of Northfield, just north of I-70, which has been closed all weekend. Folks, instead of fighting the traffic and going up 270 and sitting in that stop-and-go traffic, just get off at Central Park. Come on over to the Shops at Northfield. Find Brothers. Have a couple drinks. Let somebody else drive you up 270, of course, because you don't want to drink and drive. But it makes the drive a little bit easier when you're trying to get around all this traffic and all these traffic delays. Although they tell us that this is the last closure for this I-70 project. I hope so, because I've been driving through it for 3 years, and I'm sick of it. Anyways, again, next week, 11 a.m., tune in to us. Come on down to Brothers. We've got a small little group of people that have been coming. Unfortunately, last week we weren't here, but we'll be here all fall in the mezzanine section. So come on down. We'll get some drink specials for you. We'll get some food specials for you. We'll do something, okay? Make it worth your while to come up to the mezzanine section and watch the Dr. Jimbo Love Show featuring Seth Matthew. All right, folks, I want to thank you for tuning in. Have a great week out there. Labor Day weekend's coming up next weekend, so hopefully everybody has got plans or is making plans. Remember not to drink and drive. The heat is on. And I want to thank you guys so much for following us on LinkedIn and Getter. Facebook, I don't know if they're shadow banning me or what, but we're not getting a lot of circulation on Facebook. So share it with your friends if you get a chance. You can always find our old episodes on the YouTube channel. Just look for Dr. Jimbo Love Show featuring Seth Matthew. Folks, as they say at the end of Saving Private Ryan, okay? Get out there and earn it every day and every week. It's the only way to live your life. I look forward to seeing you back next week. Thanks for tuning in. Adios.